Good morning, Grid Connections listeners. Welcome back to Grid Connections, the podcast where we explore the intersection of clean energy, electric vehicles, and the infrastructure powering our future. We're also excited to announce the launch of Grid Connections Consulting, where we're helping government agencies, utilities, and developers simplify EV education and electrification strategy. You can learn more at gridconnections.co. In today's episode, I'm joined by Joseph Nagle. He's the head of corporate strategy at Pando Electric. We go on a deep dive into how their outlet-based electric vehicle charging approach is transforming multifamily housing. We explore why simplicity, reliability, and cost-effective installation are the keys to unlocking mass EV adoption in apartment communities. We also break down how vehicle-to-home and eventually vehicle-to-grid capabilities could turn parked EVs into grid assets, and why multifamily owners have a massive untapped opportunity to turn their buildings into distributed energy hubs. Plus, Joseph shares what he saw at the EV Charging Summit, why smart building energy management is the next frontier, and why tap and charge may finally make EV charging more convenient than a gas station. If you enjoyed today's episode, please share it with a friend or colleague who's curious about electrification, and leave us a review wherever you get your podcasts. Don't forget to sign up for our new newsletter at gridconnections.fm/newsletter. You can also use the link in the show notes today to stay in the loop with the latest trends and insights from Grid Connections and our consulting practice. With that, enjoy. Joe, thank you so much for coming back on. I know before we went live, we had quite a few different topics we wanted to cover today, but thanks for coming back, and I'm excited to get into it today.
Likewise, and thanks for having me again.
So just in case anyone is not familiar with what you and the team do at Pando Electric, Joe, can you just kind of give a just high overview of what your company and team does and then kind of your role at the company?
Yeah, so I'm the head of corporate strategy here at Pando Electric, and we make electric vehicle charging outlets that are specifically designed for multifamily facilities. And the reason we went with an EV charging outlet rather than a traditional EV charging system really boils down to one thing, and that's costs. Not so much costs to the EV driver, but costs to the property owner themselves. So the upfront cost for a lot of EV owners, or for a lot of property owners, is reduced by about 50 to 70% when you go with Pando Electric. That's because in the National Electric Code, because they're outlets, we're allowed to daisy chain our outlets together. And because of that, paired with our adaptive load management technology, we're able to cut down a lot on the infrastructure costs. Not only on the infrastructure costs, but the install time. So a lot less money being paid to the electrician because they're on site a lot fewer hours. And then on top of that, because they're outlets, they actually carry no ongoing maintenance. So they never really break. So it's actually a huge benefit to the EV driver themselves that the station is always ready and available. One of the biggest things that faces our industry right now is like cable theft or just general wear and tear and the damage and the cable and the station doesn't work. So it's really not useful for a multifamily property if you put in a traditional system and then every 1 to 3 years you're going to be down for 4 weeks. Because that cable was broken or someone stole it. So rather than doing that, we went with an outlet where there's nothing to really steal or break. It's just an outlet, it hangs out on the wall, and it's ready to be used whenever you need it.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of really clean and just really elegant ways of how your team goes about this. And in some ways, what's really interesting, I think, for some of our listeners here in North America is obviously there's a lot more behind the outlet and what your team does, but it's much more similar to what you see actually in Europe. Yes. Where it's kind of a BYOC, bring your own charger sort of thing, that really does kind of help with that ongoing maintenance and preventative for vandalism and stuff like that. But yeah, I think you kind of did just talk about something that's really fascinating. I think that's underappreciated, and that's kind of with that energy management side of it. And I know there's a few different areas we wanted to talk about that today, but let's kind of just kick it off. Maybe share an example that you have or some of the things that you think that Pando's doing around that. That's really cool. And that could be a great starting point for the listeners and then us to kind of get into this deeper conversation.
Yeah, I think one of the bigger things that Pando specifically is doing around energy management is we are actively driving forward into the vehicle to grid space. We recently did a calculation for the city of Los Angeles. They have enough EVs on the road today that equates to about 2 gigawatts of energy. Now, if you were to break that out, that's a couple of nuclear power plants of power generation that's just hanging out in batteries driving around on the road. And when you factor in the idea that most vehicles are parked for 90% of their life, you can see that there's a really big opportunity here to reinvent the grid in a way by using batteries as sort of a de facto backup storage and grid stabilizing force. There's going to be a lot of things that need to happen there, right? Like your car might have a V2G capable charger at home, or you might have one at your apartment, or you might have one at work. But the idea that you have one at all three is highly unlikely. And so we have to still bridge that gap. But when you start to think about the fact that even in Los Angeles, like that's nowhere near 100% EV charge, EV coverage.
I just did a very quick Chat GPT search, and it says just in LA County, it's at 7.3% penetration for electric vehicles.
Right.
Yeah.
We're 10. We're not even at 10.
Right.
And we're talking about 2 nuclear power plants of energy. So you can see as we start to go up and up and up, that's a lot of energy that you can play around with. And the reality is a lot of people at first were hesitant about V2G because, range anxiety was a thing. It's still kind of there, but it's really rapidly going away. And I think once it's fully gone, you'll have no issue giving 5% of your battery out, in the time of, high energy prices or maybe the potential rolling blackout, if it does stabilize the grid or if it does lower your energy costs. Or even better, if the utility is going to pay you for that energy, you're making money. So it's one of those things where I think a lot of people are going to start to really embrace this idea. And we're really at the very beginning stages of looking at a completely new world that we're walking into because of electric vehicles.
Yeah, and I think there's a couple things there I kind of want to focus on that you called out. That you're right. When people first, I think there's kind of a lot of the EV and charging nerds like us, like, oh, V2G, this sounds great. And then how it's positioned maybe to the wider public, like, oh, the power grid's just going to pull power from your battery at any time. People are like, wait, what? And now it's kind of become clear just with these pilots that obviously it's more of an opt-in thing. And when you start talking about that scale, it is wild that it's only 5 to 10% could make actually a big difference with just how many EVs we're talking about. And once again, if you're getting paid to do it, it becomes one of these things like, yeah, why wouldn't I do that? And as charging becomes more prevalent at people's homes and at work locations, it really makes it almost a why wouldn't you sort of thing. And I still think V2G is a little on the early side for a lot of this stuff, but it's and some of that, it's a lot of it's just the actual infrastructure. There's not we don't have to solve fusion. It's a very clear hardware way to get there. We just have to start implementing it. So I think it is on the horizon. There's a lot of cool things that this can unlock, and especially what Pando is kind of helping to make these charging locations more prevalent and making this kind of back and forth and that V2G, the V2G fantasy more reality and more practical for everyone.
Definitely. I think what's going to happen first isn't V2G really. It's actually going to be the V2H, and that's going to look different for single family homes versus multifamily homes.
That's a good point.
You can imagine, when you start to hit 7, 8, 9, 10% EV market penetration in a multifamily facility specifically, we're talking about enough energy that you could pull about 10%, 20%, 30%, 40% of those batteries. And I know when you start getting up into that number, it sounds scary. But from Pando's perspective, look, if I were to dump 40% of your battery back into the building at 6, 7 p.m. when the energy prices are really high, I'm going to cut your actual cost of electricity down by half or more. Like that, and they're not even paying you to do that, right? You're just going to do it because you want to lower your energy costs in general. It's not going to take me that much time to fill your battery back up, right? Like I can get a battery from 20 to 80% in 4 hours. So if I dump all that energy down there, at the beginning of the session, I've got, a data that shows most people come home and park for 12 to 15 hours. So if you push that energy in from 7 to 10 p.m., so the 3-hour window, that gives me, almost 9 to 10 hours on the low end of time for me to fill your battery back up, which I can do easily. And I think that's what's going to start. What's going to start that conversation rolling along. It's not really the vehicle to grid so much just yet. There's a lot of additional pieces that need to be involved there, but specifically the chargers and the vehicles and the grid all need to be talking to each other, because there's that use case of, well, I opted in, but I forgot to charge today and I actually am only at 20%. And if you take 10% from me, I'm
Right.
now I'm like, really, oh shoot, like this is not good. So they all need to be talking to each other so that they say, okay, well, don't take any from that car because it's only at 20%. But this car's at 100%. We can definitely take, 10% there, and that guy's not going to notice or care, right? And so it's one of those things where you're right. That's probably about a decade away. But on the lower end, like vehicle to home, that's here now, and it's really just about getting things to scale and getting things to pencil out from a cost perspective.
Yeah, and I think what is really interesting is just, and yeah, I completely agree with you. The vehicle to home. I mean, obviously, I think like people kind of heard of like the Tesla Powerwalls and a lot of these home battery backup systems, and we're starting to kind of see that still grow, but there is still a decent price delta. So depending where you live in the country, maybe it's not 100% cost effective yet, or traditionally you've just needed so many batteries that just like, okay, that's such a big hurdle. But now that you kind of get an EV involved, you can kind of get to that price delta where, especially on like a home basis, it really makes a lot of sense. And I think what was kind of interesting before this was we were kind of talking about taking that up a step, and then you go to like the multifamily. And so I think it'd be really interesting to kind of discuss that a little bit about like getting to these kind of larger commercial scale projects and how you can actually leverage, whether it be plugged in electric vehicles or just like an actual commercial battery at the site.
Yeah, I mean, I've said this a lot in the recent past about the opportunity that exists for multifamily property owners today is pretty massive if they make their bets in the right places. A lot of multifamily properties are they're getting bigger and bigger and bigger. A lot of the properties that the newer bids that we're working on are like 900, 1,000 unit properties. Like that's a small town of people
Right.
living in a single location. So that's a lot of energy just being consumed in one location. And when you're looking at something like that, the V2G stuff's really interesting. What's even more interesting to me is the fact that, because you're a property owner, you own that land, you can put solar on the roof, a battery in the garage, and then you can really start to do a lot of very interesting things. Even if you just put the battery, right? You don't have the solar. I can buy energy from the grid when it's cheap during the middle of the day, when it's not being used very much and the prices are lower, so it's off peak. Fill up my battery and then turn around and then dump that power at night when it's on peak, and I've saved 20 cents a kilowatt hour. That's like the lowest end, and you can do that every single night, night after night, endlessly. And because of that, like you could, in a sense, if you just did this the smart way, I'm buying up the energy when it's cheap, and I'm selling it back to my consumers for their energy rates that they're already used to paying. So they're not going to notice a difference. Every tenant in that building is like, well, this is the rate that I'm paying it. But I'm making 20 cents a kilowatt hour because I've done that. And if I'm doing that over and over and over again every single night, you can start to see that money just starts piling up. And that's really like at the core of what I've been preaching to property owners today is like, look, it's not quite there yet. The battery costs need to come down just a little bit. Unless you're in like a certain location, there are some like government grants that you can get still to do this, and you can do it fairly affordably. But I think as we start to progress into this new future of battery tech, we are going to see a lot more property owners take advantage of this. And why not? Like you can do a lot of things. You can either make a ton of money, or you can entice your residents to live there longer because you're going to offer them a rate that's cheaper than the utility rate that they're used to paying. So I could just pass those savings on to my tenants if I wanted to, because I'm going to be a noble landlord. I'm not here to just make money, so I'm going to help you guys out, cut the energy costs. There's a lot of things that you can do, and so I think property owners, especially large property owners like multifamily housing, have a tremendous opportunity in front of them to really reshape how our grid and utility system works. And I think it's kind of well overdue. Out here in Northern California, PG&E is. I don't mean to badmouth PG&E. They have a lot of stuff that they have to work through. I get the challenges that they face, but this is only a net positive for them. It will help reduce a lot of the issues that they are facing, and that they can focus on, cleaning up some of the challenges that they've had, specifically around, power generation or down power lines and all that stuff. So this could actually really help in a lot of ways.
Yeah, one of the things we actually talk about, especially around EV charging, is demand charges and kind of those other things that people might not be aware of when you get to the commercial scale. Is that something that can kind of come into those conversations to help pencil it out for the kind of battery backup system? Or is it just these entities, when they're being built, it's such a much more kind of planned out that you don't run into that as much?
No, it's definitely like it's one of those such things that you can talk about now. I think the issue that we're currently facing is all these tariffs that has caused such a
Yeah.
chaotic market that's probably what's going to prevent it for the foreseeable future until they go away, or until there's some consistency that exists. So that's actually what's holding it back right now, is that they don't know what their building costs are going to be, because hey,
Right.
the steel that I import or concrete that I need, or lumber, all that stuff is going to cost extra, or it's just different, and now I need to redo an entire calculation, and that might blow up my budget. And so it's one of those things where we're probably going to see a pullback. The thing is like a lot of the properties that already exist, the retrofits could take advantage of this. And it will take a few people to kind of get over the fear. There's always the fear of, oh, what happens if there's, a thermal runaway? I think
Yeah, I was gonna ask you maybe some of the pushback or things you're getting. Obviously, price is probably the main one, but just other things you might be hearing.
price is definitely number one, but then number two is safety. There is that fear of, I don't want to burn my property down. I understand that
Right.
completely. Tesla definitely solved, I think, this problem with their mega packs. And then there's other companies too that make like shipping containers that have full fire suppression systems within them. So, there's the risk there is so minimal. It's just going to take people some time to get some comfort around it. And then it's more just the idea itself is a little bit beyond sort of what they're used to, what's normal, right? You're talking to a bunch of people who are mostly focused on vacancy rates. Like that's what they look at,
Right.
vacancy rates. And that's like, okay, well, I don't care so much about the energy in the building and all that stuff. I just want to make sure that works so that I don't lose any tenants. And when you have such a hyper focus on one thing, when you bring an idea like this, sometimes it just flies right past them because they just don't have the time to think it over. They're like, yeah, that's not really my concern right this moment. But I do think that we are starting to see a few of the larger companies toy around with these ideas. I'm seeing more and more multifamily properties looking at solar as a way to sort of offset their energy costs. I think you're going to see some more start to be like, maybe we should put in a few batteries, maybe not huge ones. Let's do some small
Kind
deployments
of pilot
first.
testing it.
Yeah, and then I think it's going to sort of slowly sort of edge up to that. Yeah, let's just put a commercial grade battery in the garage. We'll just lose one parking space, dump in a huge battery right there, and be done with it.
Interesting. And I guess for those listening, how, let's say you're a property owner or a commercial kind of tenant, and how does one kind of reach out to Pando? What does that kind of look like in that process, and what elements of it does your team kind of work with and help them with?
Yeah, so getting a hold of Pando is pretty easy. Just go to our website, pandoelectric.com. There's a phone number on there that you can call us directly, or you can fill out the form if you're not a phone person. I know it's always a big split between, it's like boomers and Gen X always get on the phone, and then millennials and Gen Z are always filling out the form. But we pretty much do everything from start to finish. We try to take all of this off your plate because we know you have other things you want to worry about. And EV charging is probably way, way, way down on the bottom of your list. That's also the reason why we designed the product the way that we did, is to reduce the amount of time you're spending thinking about EV charging. So we just integrated tap and charge technology into our outlets. That eliminates a really big failure point, to be perfectly honest, with our Gen 1 model, which was it required our EV drivers to have internet connectivity or cellular connectivity to scan the QR code to initiate a charge session. Well, in some of our locations, you're in an underground parking garage, you don't have great service, and trying to start a charge session when you don't have internet connectivity is impossible. So by integrating this, now you just tap your phone with Apple Pay or Google Pay, tap it against the charger, that starts the charge session. So it's eliminating that failure point. So really, we're constantly on the lookout for things to reduce the friction for everybody in this process, not just the property owners, but the EV drivers as well.
And why does the tap and charge functionality work? Is it essentially the Apple Pay or Google Pay has the track of the cost? Because I am hearing this from a couple other charging providers as well. Because completely agree with you. This has just been an issue in general. I even had a pretty bad experience recently. Fortunately, I didn't need to charge, but I was trying to test it. And this, to clarify, was not Pando. This was a pretty well documented charging provider I have issues with, but I'll leave it at that. And unfortunately, unfortunately, my phone had the app on it, but I have a setting. So like if I don't use an app for a while, it just deletes it. So here I'm at this charger. The tap and pay doesn't work. None of the credit card reader functionality works. And then where I'm at has like no cell service. So I tried to download the app and I couldn't do it. So, I mean, it sets you up to really be, and this, it's not like it was in a parking garage. This is just in a really rural, remote area where in a lot of ways it's even more critical. But yeah, I guess I'm kind of going down a tangent there, but I'm kind of curious. Is it essentially Apple Pay and Google Pay store a record of the transaction, and then once it connects to the internet again, it makes the transaction of the charge session go through? Or what is kind of allowing tap and pay to be much more dynamic in that regard?
Yeah, so that's actually an excellent question. It's in a weird way, we're coming like full circle. I don't know if you remember this, but about 10 years ago, NFC cards were typically the thing, and people were getting annoyed by that because every single company issued you a little plastic NFC card, and you'd use that to tap that against the charger, and that would unlock it. And people were like, well, now I have like 10 cards in my car driving around using different charging stations, and it was pain. And that's when everybody shifted over to the apps, and that created a new problem. So what we ended up doing was merging these two things together. So what you would end up doing the first time is you would scan the QR code, download the app, and then you basically can take a virtual NFC card and put it on your phone in your wallet. And then you just come up to the charger and tap it against the charger. That unlocks the session. We know that the charger that you've tapped, you have access to because of the card ID that has been issued. So we know who is allowed to use that charger. When you access that charger, your phone's not actually doing anything but passing some very simple data to the charging station, which is the source of truth. So the charging station knows that, okay, this user is allowed to use me. I'll unlock the device. I'll start accruing charges on that user's account, and then it'll be billing them in the back end. So it has nothing to do with the user's phone at all. It's all on our system, and our system is a completely localized system. So it's actually, on site. There's only one charger that needs a signal out, and then the rest will all share that same signal. If for whatever reason that signal fails, the next best one picks it up and sends it out. Like in total, we're talking about in a total month, about 5 minutes of uptime is actually needed to send the data back and forth. So it's not really like a pressing issue for these things to be connected all the time. And so when we recognized that, it was like, okay, well then all we need to do is allow people to unlock the charger. The chargers will keep the knowledge themselves until they can send it back out, because it's really not that much data. It's just a bunch of numbers. That's it.
Yeah.
And that's how that's working.
Interesting. So your Pando site still does need an internet connection, but should something happen, or even if it's kind of not the strongest connection, it really only needs to have that happen a few times a month. To the user, they really never notice until maybe there's a delay in the charge or something maybe on their card. But other than that, the main thing is actually just making sure the charge goes through and happens.
Yeah, that's really all you need. And again, it's like just a string of numbers. It's really such
right.
Data. It's not hard to get it out.
Yeah. Well, that one is great to hear. And I know with kind of the tap and charge functionality, is there, if you're listening to this, is there something maybe the listeners should be kind of aware of, and like what this is unlocking other than just ease of use, but kind of making it much more functional and kind of creating a frictionless experience. Are there any other kind of I guess advantages to the end user with this addition other than just you tap it and it works?
I think that is the main thing, right?
Yeah, that is huge.
It's just trying to create we want an experience that is better than a gas station, right?
Yeah.
So it's something that, gas stations figured this out, put the credit card in. Now I don't have to go in and talk to the clerk and tell him how much gas I want and all that other stuff. Like, I just swipe my cards, fill it up, and it charges me. That's kind of the same thing we're trying to get to here. We recognize also that people have their phones with them all the time. So it's just tap your phone against the charger, it'll unlock, and you can walk off and do whatever you need to. The whole idea in general around Pando is we want you to kind of forget about EV charging at all. I want you to show up to your building and just have this mindless activity for a few seconds where you plug in each end, you tap the thing, and you walk off, and you're really not actively thinking about it. And there was actually someone who made a really great point about this that I'll steal, which is someone asked them with their level 2 charger at home, like, well, how long does it take you to fill up your car? And they said, I don't know, about 5 seconds. I just plug it in and I walk off, and then when I want to use it again, it's full. Right? Like, that's the actuality of the time spent. It has nothing to do with how long it's sitting there. The car's going to sit in your garage or in its parking space for a very long time. So really what you're trying to do is just get somebody to where they actually want to be faster. And so this is one of those methods that we're trying to do that.
Now, I realize this may be a roadmap thing, but this is also another technology we get a lot of questions asked about is like auto charge and plug-in charge. Is that something that your team can support, or is it because that there is an outlet kind of in between that it makes it kind of hard to have that communication level with the actual EV?
It does make it hard, but not impossible. This is one of the things I think I bring up a lot. It's like, these are all just engineering problems. They're not like not impossible. It's like, we just have to solve for it, which we have. Our chargers are working with the OEMs to get API access to the cars themselves so that our chargers in the car can actually just sit there when they're, 2 feet away from each other and talk. That's how we're able to overcome that. So we're just at that point where we're at that early stage where it's one of those things that's being talked about and it sounds great and everybody wants it. It's not ready yet, and it's a little bit of time.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't want to sound like we're talking. I mean, the fact that reliable tap and charge, like I said, that is such a huge step forward, and it's unfortunate that hasn't become more common in the industry. So, really, kudos to you guys. And I realize with the plug-in charge thing, you have to realize, I think a lot of people get kind of hung up and they think it's on the charger side, but so much of it too is actually on the automaker and the OEM, and even within that specific models. And so, I mean, I agree with you. Even just getting to a better than gas station tap and charge thing is going to be huge, and having that functionality is great. But when we're kind of looking at where the product is now and just kind of Pando as a company, I know we were actually supposed to meet at the EV Charging Summit and Expo, and just calendars kind of kept moving there. But I'm kind of curious. We've had other people on from the EV Charging Summit already, and I would just love to hear maybe some of the trends or other things coming out of that, maybe even going in and then coming out of the event that really stood out to you.
I think, man, that's a great question. One of the things that really caught my eye was we're going back around. This is more of a negative take, so I apologize to any listeners here, but we're going back around and creating overly complicated systems that don't need to be that way. I'm not going to call out who was doing this, but there was a cabinet there that was like 10 feet tall and had all these, it was like a multi-charger. And I'm like, there's no point to this. You can just install one in every space. You don't need this like monstrosity that you're going to install somewhere and have all these multiple cables hanging off of it. It just doesn't make a lot of sense. And I saw like a few other things there that were just like, they're going back into like this complex system that doesn't need to exist, right? It should be simple. Like Europe solved this pretty easily. Just type 2 chargers work really well. They require the user to do a minimal amount of effort of plugging in your own cable. As long as it locks to each end, I don't know too many people who are willing to cut an active cable like that. That would be a death sentence. So you're pretty safe in that scenario. Nobody's going to steal that. And then on top of that, you just put in, strategically placed DC fast chargers, and you basically solve the problem. There are some things that are being worked on that I was really happy to see, especially from some of the larger players, looking at full building energy management. This is something that EverCharge worked on way back. And again, it really fell to the properties not being ready. I think we're getting into a space of them being ready, and that full building energy management stuff is really, really impressive. I will call out that the savings that you get from a full building energy management system with a traditional solution are similar to the savings you get from a Pando solution. So it's one of those things where we've solved the same problem of cost through simplicity, not through complexity. The thing that I like about the full building energy system is that it unlocks a lot more potential for adding EV chargers and doing just more intelligent things with the building power in general. Because the thing that is weird about our electric code is that you have to account for all of the electrical appliances all the time. So it basically assumes that everything is on all the time, and we know that that's not true. And now that we have, systems that are able to tell when things are not being used, you can move that power around in all sorts of fun ways, not just for EV charging, but like HVAC systems or whatever, right? So I really think that is something that a lot of the EV charging companies, especially the ones that are focusing on multifamily, should really drive hard into, because it's a huge, huge, huge potential.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting call out. And it's kind of funny you say that, because my own takeaway from the EV Charging Summit was kind of similar. I don't know if you were able to attend many of the workshops. I found it really fast. Sometimes the presentations at the workshops, they were fun and they were good, but it's like, as someone who's kind of been in this industry for a while, it's nothing new. To me, what was really fascinating was hearing the questions being asked by these people who are in the industry or who are curious about it. And a lot of the questions were kind of the same questions that I've heard for like the last decade. And there's nothing wrong with that, because it's clear like there's just more and more people coming into the space that are now like ready to do it. But it also just reminded me that it kind of goes to your simplicity thing too, that there's just so many things that are kind of being taken too far, instead of just being able to have the right messaging and approach people with what the questions are, and kind of overcome some of these misperceptions, or making sure that they're comfortable with the technology first before trying to give them the top of the line version of it, and kind of going through like that crawl, walk, run approach. I think there's a lot of the run, sprint, like high end solutions being positioned, and the people are coming in well intentioned, but they just don't know. And there needs to be a better messaging of like trying to get to that. And a lot of the time, the best answer is a simple one, not just from an educational standpoint, but also in the physical implementation.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more on that fact. I think the thing that you kind of pointed something else out, and my biggest takeaway actually was just how big that conference is getting. I went
that's a great
very
point.
First one, and it was really tiny. It was in a single ballroom at the Mirage, which actually no longer exists anymore. And we were in there, and I remember thinking, I was like, oh man, this is a little tiny for a charging conference. And now it's like it's getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And I think that kind of just points to something else that a lot of people are asking. Oh, well, like with this new administration, are you worried about the industry? And I'm like, no. Look how big that conference was. Look how much excitement there is around all this stuff. Like, we've already passed the point of no return. When you have 7% of the vehicles in Los Angeles are EV, it's game over. Like, people know.
And once again, that's including the ones that have been on the roads for 20 years and stuff. It's not just like, the new vehicle sales are even higher. But I'm sorry, continue.
Are like way, way high. And so we're looking at like, people know that they're better cars. Like, they're just better. This is not a political thing. It's not me because I'm in the industry. Like, if you don't believe that they're better cars, like, just go out and drive one. Like, you're basically getting, if you drive a Kia Iconic or whatever, a Hyundai Iconic or a Kia Kona, whatever, those cars basically have the performance of a sports vehicle, like something that you would have to pay like $80,000-$90,000.
5 to 10 years ago would have a huge premium. It has way more acceleration performance, and then none of the maintenance that a high-end performance vehicle usually does.
Right. So it's like, just on that level, you're like, wow, that's a way better car. I want that car, right? So it's like, okay, we're reaching into this space where it's like you get performance of vehicle specs and no maintenance from a car that's going to cost you, it's starting to get down there, but it's like, $30,000 to $40,000. That's not bad. As long as we
No,
can
for sure.
work it
And
back down that 25K, we're on
yeah.
track.
Well, and I think something I like to remind people, and I'm not saying this is right either, the average new car price, electric or not, is like $48,000. So it's not like new cars have ever been cheap. And I think that is like, I just like following this industry, there's always been like this pushback. Well, it's like, well, the battery's got to get down to 100 kilowatt hour or they're not going to make sense. Well, they got to get under 100,000. Well, they got to get under 50,000. And I agree with you. Having like a $25,000 entry car is great. Would love to see that. But so many people actually buy used cars, and we're finally seeing those start to have a greater inventory. But I do agree with you. Like, I think, and maybe I'm just overly optimistic about stuff. I definitely got a sense from other people in the industry. They were kind of like, I don't know. I don't want to say depressed, but maybe a little pessimistic going into the event. And then coming out of the event, everyone did have kind of a renewed source of optimism. And I think it's totally what you're saying, like just how large the event is, how many people are there. And that's a big part of the reason we weren't even able to meet is like, I was in so many of these workshops and other meetings. I wanted to spend more time on the floor, but I'd even get a chance to do that. And I think that's what makes it so cool. And don't get me wrong, it was like an exhausting 3 days, but there was so much going on. It could almost be like a 4 or even 5 day thing, which is wild to see.
Yeah, and I'll touch on one more point that you hit on, which like if you are feeling depressed about the EV industry right now, I wouldn't. I've been here long enough. I was here when the first Trump administration tried to kill it, and he failed then, and it was a much better time to kill the industry.
Right.
So we're now at a point where it's like it's much harder to kill off. Like there's too many plans in place. There's too many companies that are doing this. There's too many all EV companies that are successful. Like look at Rivian's stock right now in a down market. They are doing really well. So we're looking at an industry that is not like suffering in any way. And to your point about the used vehicles, like there's a ton of really good value to get out of the used vehicles right now because what we have in say Porsche, like you could get a 2023 Porsche Taycan for like $53,000. Right. It's so cheap now. Like I was looking at it, I was like, gosh, I kind of really want that car. I don't have anywhere to park it right now.
Yeah.
Man.
Yeah. And I mean, there's kind of a pro and con, but I think overall a good or long term is like for a long time, EVs were not depreciating as fast as traditional vehicles. And now there's kind of been, unfortunately, for buyers, a flip where they've been depreciating faster. But for the used car market and like greater exposure of EVs, you're totally right. And especially, I mean, once again, you're talking about what was originally $100,000, pretty limited car as it was, but insane performance, not just driving, but like the charging and all these different things that at that $50,000 price point makes it extremely competitive. Even with a brand new car, it makes you really think, is that really what you want to go with?
Well, I think it's also the other side of that where I think people don't appreciate the fact that these cars are going to last a really long time.
That's a good point.
I see a lot of comments online about, should I buy this car? Is it bad? Like the battery's bad or whatever. And I'm like, no, I'm like, the battery's probably fine. Those batteries are designed to last. If you take care of your battery,
and a lot of them are warranted for so long. Yeah.
So it's like, I wouldn't worry about any of that stuff. And it's like one of those things where I think the used market is going to see a shift around too, just because of the nature of these cars. They're going to hang around for way, way longer. It almost equates to my mom owns a 2002 Honda Civic, and that thing will not die. And it's beat to hell. Like it's been through me as a teenager driving that thing around. It still works really well. And she gets offers occasionally for people to buy it from her for like $4,000. And this is, a 20-year-old car. And so It's like, I think if you get a car that has that kind of longevity, all of a sudden people are like, I want that car because I know it's not going to break. Like, it's just a really great vehicle. That's EVs in general, is like that level of just longevity. Now, to say that all of them on the used market are going to be good, that's not true. I've definitely driven some that had damaged battery packs that are terrible. So you do need to be like on the lookout, and you do need to make sure you're protecting yourself. But overall, like most of the used vehicles, especially like I'll go back to that 2023 Taycan, like that car, is under warranty still. That battery, even
Yeah.
if it broke tomorrow, hey, you get a free battery, like brand new battery in your vehicle, and now you basically got like a brand new car.
Well, and I think you're totally right with like the Honda, and you can say actually pretty similar to a lot of the Japanese car brands that they are known for that kind of resiliency. And part of that too is they've been around for a century of kind of getting that fine tuning and a lot of that. But there's also a lot of traditional combustion cars that don't have that kind of. And I think people always think like, well, this Honda or like these cars that last forever. It's like, well, that's still actually a pretty small percentage of the combustion. And I mean, we had growing up, we had a Super Outback that eventually died at like 350,000 miles and could have been saved, but at that point, like what you need to do was more than what the car was worth. And that's great. But like when you start going to the electric vehicle thing, I think some of it too was like, okay, they've only really been in mass production now. And even mass production's like a stretch because that's pretty much the Nissan Leaf and the Model S for a little over a decade.
Right.
You start getting more and more of these brands that have actually been around for, and not even the brands, but the products like kind of get beyond this 5-year life cycle and just how much better car companies are now at figuring out points of failure and like doing QC testing in advance for a lot of like exactly to what you're saying. And then at the same time, if you're looking, I mean, don't worry, I love the Porsche Taycan. If you're looking at that specifically, the pro and con of that is the instant there's a new version out of it, it loses so much money. And if you're looking to buy one used, I mean, that's also a big part of the reason it's appreciated. Now there's a newer version that honestly, outside of it charging faster, which is cool, the old one charged so fast as it was that it's like for the car you're getting, even if you're not, that's only like an advantage if you're road tripping every other weekend. And even if you're only road tripping once a month, it's still such a great car for that like, why wouldn't you look at it? So there's, and I guess where I'm going with all this, there's a lot to be optimistic about and kind of looking forward to see what has already happened and kind of going to your comment about like, if it was going to die, it would have died like 5 to 10 years ago. And now there's just this kind of critical mass of it might not be growing as fast as many people want, but it's still growing. I think the thing people don't see in a lot of the headlines is the actual auto industry has been shrinking and actually doing terribly. So anything that is actually growing in that industry right now is actually kind of a miracle and should be honestly celebrated more than what the headlines might have you think.
Yeah, well, that actually leads me into my next point about that is like we're actually getting pretty close to where you're not going to drive your own car anymore. Like
Right.
in San Francisco, Waymo in the last 2 years has absolutely taken over. Uber has slashed their prices to like the bare minimum just to stay competitive because people would rather get in a car with absolutely no driver and take them somewhere than have to deal with like the mixed bag of what you're going to get out of Uber. And so
Yeah.
I think Uber's days are now like numbered. And I think what we'll end up seeing evolving out of that, and this is some quote that I can't remember which Ford CEO it was. It wasn't Jim Farley, but they said basically if you can get the cost per mile down to $1 on an electric vehicle, if it's autonomous, you're basically on par with the ownership of a vehicle. So it's
Yeah.
like, why not just, at some point people are just going to say, you know what, I don't need it. When I want to use a car, I'll just call, whatever driverless taxi is around, hop in that and take me wherever I want to go. And I don't need to own the car at all anymore. And honestly, like, I'll be perfectly honest, like I haven't owned a car in over a decade. I love it. And anytime I think about buying a car, I'm kind of like, ugh, I don't want to deal with all of the headaches that come with the car. Even an EV that's really simplistic, like you have to pay insurance and, I have to worry about people
Parking and
all this other
yeah,
stuff.
exactly.
If I don't have it, I'm just like, it's just not a thing. And my life goes on like as normal. I can get out of town. I can rent a car if I need to get out of town. It's not a big deal.
No, I think that's a great call out. It's been really wild to see the advances in the autonomous space, and that's definitely something we've talked about on here quite a bit too. Where, I took a Waymo this past Thanksgiving when I was down in Phoenix with my in-laws, and I thought it was overall impressive. They did not like kind of, and I haven't been in one in a few months now, and it sounds like there's been obviously another one that's made a little less jerky, but obviously seeing the steering wheel and all that stuff, it just, the way that Waymo drove, I thought was safe and great, but it just felt robotic. It didn't feel like a human in a lot of ways. And there's pros and cons to that, obviously. But what was funny was recently we have a Model 3 that has like the newer hardware for the self-driving. And obviously those are kind of in different realms as to like, obviously Waymo's actually doing it and Tesla says they're going to do it. But it's gotten just wickedly impressive that I turned it on without telling them. And then we got to our destination and like, I didn't drive the whole time and they had no clue. And even going down, as much fun as going to the EV Charging Summit was, I just was kind of also blown away because I used to live in the Bay Area. I used to travel to New York. I used to take Ubers, multiple ones a daily. Now I've been kind of living more in a more rural area. And so it's kind of been a while since, especially post-COVID, like being in an Uber and taking the Ubers to Vegas and everything. I was just like, wow, this is such, I wouldn't say is more stressful or stress related, but just like the driving experience, the Tesla, in to some extent even the Waymo, but especially the Tesla, was so much smoother than your average Uber driver trying to cut through traffic and do all these other things. And it's just like when you think about it as a passenger, where we are at in that and how that impacts charging and all these different things for the end consumer, it's kind of a wild time.
Yeah, I mean, if you really want to get in a time machine, I always take cabs from the airport because it's so much simpler to just walk down and grab one and
Yeah.
pull off. But like, I can see why that model doesn't work anymore. Whereas like with an Uber, I can call the Uber. If you time it right, you can kind of walk straight up and get in one, but it's really difficult. But outside of that, when you're at your destination, you just hop out and leave. Like with the cab, I have to sit there and wait for them to run my card and all this other stuff. And it's like,
Yeah.
the cars are usually like beat to hell. Like,
Yeah.
there's
the one I took definitely was.
Yeah, no, so we're slowly evolving into an actually like honestly pretty bright and better future for at least some of these systems. So I'm looking forward to like how we start to evolve this. Like the thing that I always tell people who are a little bit like negative towards autonomous and EVs is like, look, like these, to your point, like it's really only been about at best 15-ish years. Like if you really want to stretch it that far, like, really it's been about 10. And we're at the very beginning of a long, long journey. And if you want to go back 100 years and look at how the automobile evolved, like over time, you'll see a similar pattern start to emerge. Like with the charging stations, people, oh, they're not safe. Batteries aren't safe. Same thing was said about gas. That people would protest about putting gas stations on in neighborhoods because people were afraid that they would blow up. Right? Like these arguments and conversations are not new. All you need to do is just go back in time a little bit. You can see that this is exactly the same thing that people were talking about back then.
Well, yeah, and I think it's funny you say the decade thing because you're right, but it's like I was living in Palo Alto, and it's like there's a difference between being like in the R&D phase and like an actual commercial service, and in some ways, Waymo has just barely left that.
Yeah.
And so it's really only been a couple of years that Waymo's kind of like left fully R&D, has become more of a commercial service. So when you even think about it that way, it really is truly wild how quickly that as a service or even an option has evolved. And now obviously we could talk about autonomy and all this all probably for its own podcast. And before we go down that, I think we should probably get a little bit focused just given our time. Back on, I know we've talked a lot about multifamily and kind of Pando and how that helps with it, but I think looking forward and for any topic or any parts of it we haven't covered yet, I know a lot of our listeners are always really interested in multifamily and some of how that plays into charging and owning an EV. I'd just kind of like to hear your thoughts a little bit about some of the things to think about how Pando really does help with that, and how, if you're in that position, to really kind of work with you guys to make that happen.
Yeah, I think, we touched on all of it, right? So it's the upfront cost savings, the zero ongoing maintenance, and the full service and support once you do contact Pando. And the reality of all of those things was just to eliminate hassle and headache for the property owner. That was the actual thing holding this industry back, specifically EV charging and multifamily, because they were just tired of like EV chargers were a hassle. There was a company, and they still exist, and I'm sure it was the same company that you couldn't get a charge at in the middle of nowhere because of the way they set up the system. That's done a huge disservice to the industry. They've built these things out in a haphazard way, and it caused a lot of problems, and it damaged the reputation of EV charging. And so in a lot of these properties, we end up going in and removing that particular competitor out and putting in our chargers in. And that's mostly down to the fact that they just can't stand that those chargers are always broken. And when they're broken or they don't work, they then get the complaint from the tenants, and that those tenants complain quite a lot because that's their main charging conveyance. And it's the same thing
Right.
as like I tell people is like if your gas station that you use all the time is closed for 4 weeks, you're going to start to get pissed, and it's not going to take very long. And it's the same situation with, at your, multifamily house that you're going to be working with somebody who, wants to use the charger and they can't. It's a problem. And it's going to be a problem if you have to share the charger too. That was the other issue. They're like, well, let's just have two chargers for a community of, 200. Like that worked 10 years
Right.
ago, does not work today. You need to put in probably 20%, if not more, depending on where you're at. Because the other thing that we know is that the number of the cars on site, once you start providing charging, start doubling every year. And so you're looking at more and more people go and either buy an EV because they know now I can get charging at home, so I'm going to buy the EV that I want, or you're going to have a lot of people who live in a community that doesn't provide charging or doesn't provide enough charging move into that community because they do. And the big takeaway that I had, there's a big conference, the National Multifamily Housing Council does a tech conference every year. The biggest takeaway from the last one that I went to was that the shift in the last 10 years went from EV charging is nice to have, they're a luxury item, maybe put in one or two if you have a luxury property, and then otherwise don't bother, to you need to have EV charging or you're going to lose tenants. And so to bring this conversation full circle, when the thing that they're focusing in on is vacancy rates, when they hear you're going to lose tenants if you don't have EV charging, they'll open up their pocketbook and they'll start putting in the EV charging because they know if they don't, the vacancy rate's going to go up. And that's what they care about the most.
Yeah, I think that actually does kind of go back to that theme we were talking about from the EV Charging Summit. One of the big things to me was visibility. And so that visibility of when someone sees there's actually chargers at where they're renting, they're like, oh, I can get one now. And so hearing that stat that it starts doubling makes so much sense, because EV charging visibility, I think, is one big part of it. And then the second part was just like so many of these groups I was talking to, it's just like, and I've been working with our consultancy, is just like, you just have to get butts in seats still. I know that's what people were doing like a decade ago, and we think we're better and way past that. No, we're still way too early. And if you want to like people to get that light bulb moment and see the switch, they have to get behind an EV and like drive it just for 5 minutes, and then quickly they get it. But you still just have to get butts in seats and have visibility for EV chargers so they feel comfortable that there's a place to charge, versus what used to be they have to see a gas station, and so many people don't really get that whole part that makes an EV great is the level 2 and level 1 even side of it, about being able to actually charge more than 80% of the time that way, instead of having to go to a charger or having to go to a gas station like they normally do.
Yeah, I mean, you kind of bring up something really interesting that, the last time we spoke, I shared with you a project called Woodland Creek where we outfitted a 90-unit condo with 92 chargers for only $405 a station. So go back and check that out, by the way, if you really want to hear that story.
Yeah, we'll have links in today's
Yeah.
shows note for the previous one. That was a great conversation as well.
Yeah, I won't dive too deep into that. You can go listen to the other podcast for that one. But we're doing a ribbon cutting at the end of May, on May 31st at that property. And the thing that I'll bring up, number one, we are going to do some EV showcases so people can sit in them and actually get a feel for them. What was really, really interesting is that project has only been installed for about 3 months. We've already had 2 people buy EVs at that property, right? So in 3 months, 2 people immediately sold their old car, got in, and went and bought. I think one's a Tesla and one was a Hyundai. So it's like we are we already now feel like we've solved that chicken and egg problem. Like, what do you need to put in first? Do you need the EV drivers on site first, or do you need the EV chargers? I think, in all honesty, you need the charging first, because now people know, especially where we're at with this industry, that you can, hey, if I put in these EV chargers, the EV drivers are going to show up. And the people on my
Yeah.
property are probably going to start buying cars because they've wanted one for so long, they just didn't know where to actually charge it. And now that you have that ability, it's going to change things. And the really interesting thing about that property is literally like, it's not even a full block away. There's a bank of EVgo superchargers, like DC fast chargers, that are there that are, right, very, very nearby the campus of that property. And people are still opting to buy. We're waiting because they're like, I don't want to park it over there for however, 30, 45 minutes and then have to move it. That's an inconvenience. I want to have to park it in my space, charge it up, and walk away and leave. That's the thing. That is the key to making EVs work, is making it more convenient for people to charge their car at home.
I guess one final thing, and that's perfect time because I wanted to get to the ribbon cutting and talk about all that. But I've seen with some people who do have, they're staying in apartments. There's some apartment complexes where they have EV charging now, where it's like, okay, here are the EV charging spots. Charge your EV there, and then once it's done, ideally try and move it as soon as you can. And it's obviously kind of loosely enforced versus some that they're like, we have parking for 150, like just for example, I'm just pulling these numbers out of nowhere, but like regular parking permits 150, but for a EV parking space, it's 175 or something like that. Are you seeing, or do you have any recommendations for multifamily and apartment dwellings that are implementing EV charging for the first time, how to kind of think about and kind of execute them?
Yeah, I do. The biggest thing that they need to be looking at is the scalability of what their solution is going to be able to do. So not just thinking about what you need to put in today, but what you're going to need in the near future. Because at some point, you're probably going to want to, at least for the next decade, scale it up to maybe 50%. Out here in the Bay Area, we're already at 40, well over 40% new vehicle sales are electric. So it's going to, at some point, we're going to hit 40% on the roads. And so you're going to need 40% in the parking lot. You don't need it right now, though. And so one of the things that we did build into our solution is that, that daisy chaining technology is actually really cool because I can drop in one charger, and then as I need more, I can branch off multiple from it. And the installs and the costs are really, really cheap. So it's like $500 to add one more charger rather than I have to do another, $5,000 run. I do that $5,000 run once, which with ours, it's actually about 2,500, 2,000 to 2,500. But I only had to do that once, and now I can branch off 5, other outlets off of it. And so we try to build in a way for the system to expand easily within the garage and grow. And really, that's what they need to be thinking about, is not just, I have 10 EV drivers, I need to put in 10 chargers today, and now I'm done. It's like, no, you need to put in 10 now. You probably need to actually 20 now. And then you need to start thinking about, how do I scale that 15 to 20 to 30 to 40 over the next decade? And basically look for providers that are going to give you that ability to scale easily, and not just, oh, you can scale, but it's going to cost, like easily and effectively. Those are the keys. And that's why I believe Pando does have the right solution to solve this market problem.
No, that I think is a great place to end it at. But Joe, thank you so much for coming on again. For those who are listening, I know we'll have some links in today's show notes, but what's the best way to connect with you or kind of learn about Pando and any other upcoming events your team may have?
Absolutely. So number one, May 31st at the Woodland Creek HOA in East Palo Alto, we're doing a ribbon cutting for our flagship 100%. We believe this is the largest 100% property in the nation, but I'll just say it at minimum is the largest in California. We know that for sure. You can follow me on LinkedIn. I love to have chats and conversations with people there. Or if you want to reach out to Pando Electric, just jump over to pandoelectric.com, give us a phone call or fill out our form, and we'll be happy to get back to you.
Thanks so much, Joe. We'll have to have you again on soon. It's always been great to kind of hear what your team is doing, and even just in the few months since you've last been on, how much change and how many different things that your team's been able to implement. So thanks so much for coming on again.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. It's always been a fun time with you.
That's a wrap on this episode of Grid Connections. A big thanks again to Joseph Nagle from Pando Electric for joining us and sharing his insights on how scalable, cost-effective charging infrastructure is reshaping what's possible for multifamily housing and energy resilience. If today's conversation got you thinking about EV charging strategy, whether you're a property owner, policymaker, or just EV curious, check out Grid Connections Consulting. That's gridconnections.co, where we're helping organizations navigate the shift to electrified transportation. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with someone in your network, leave us a 5-star review, and subscribe to our newsletter using the link in the show notes to keep up with the latest from the front lines of the energy transition. Until next time, this is the Grid Connections Podcast, signing off.